Good morning. It is October 4th, and we're here for our regular scheduled county commissioner meeting. We have a full slate of commissioners, our county administrator, Mr. Gonzalez, and our clerk of the board. And at this time, I'll call the meeting to order and ask everyone to please rise and join in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty. The first item on the agenda is the approval of our vouchers.
Move for approval of fund expenditures in the total amount of $208,074.57 as presented, and note that it has been signed by two representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Move for approval of salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll in the total amount of $1,208,474.76 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Moves us down to the consent agenda. There are 3 items on the consent agenda today.
Move for approval of consent agenda, 3 items as presented.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for the 3 items on the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Takes us down to regular business. First item is FC proclamation. Mr. Gonzalez.
Yes, good morning, Chair. And this is something that we partnered with the Wise Company and Anthony Contreras, who's the training manager there. I don't think Anthony was able to make it, but this proclamation recognizes and commemorates the 78th anniversary of the National Disability Awareness Month. So I'll read a little bit of this proclamation. Whereas October 2023 marks the 78th anniversary of the National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and whereas the purpose of National Disability Employment Awareness Month is to educate about disability employment issues and celebrate the many and varied contribution of America's workers with disabilities, and whereas the history of National Disability Employment Awareness Month traces back to 1945 when Congress enacted a law declaring the first week in October each year National Employ the Physically Handicapped Week, and whereas in 1962 the word physically was removed to acknowledge the employment needs and contributions of individuals with all types of disabilities. So it's something we're proud to partner with, and I know Anthony couldn't make it, but I was glad he brought this to our attention and making sure that we're supporting this proclamation. I'll make sure he gets this also. I didn't see you. So I want to present this to you, Anthony, and Anthony's a friend of mine, and I appreciate it and really appreciate you pushing this initiative, sir. Feel free to say a few words if you'd like.
Is this on? Okay, cool. Good morning, commissioners. I want to thank you for issuing this proclamation today. I am here with a few of our providers, county partners in this effort to employ individuals with disabilities. October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. We've been at this for years, working on getting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities employed in our community. I think right now, nationally, we're sitting at about 1 in 5 people with disabilities are employed. We're actively working on that, trying to double that to about every 2 in 5 by 2030. And it's a lofty goal. And, we're doing these rallies, these events across the state to get our community re-energized after COVID to get people employed. So feel free to, reach out and we can get you more information on that. But I'm just here excited to spread the word about supported employment and helping people with disabilities get to work and really push that message of employment for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other commissioners like to say anything?
I'd just offer that if the county doesn't have a program to seek out and employ people with disabilities, we should start one.
How would they contact you, like future employers?
I think the easiest way would be to contact the employment providers. They're the ones doing the work on the ground. And so we have, in Washington State, it's through a county partnership. So Benton Franklin County contracts that service out to all the employment providers, but Paxton Peterson is actually our county coordinator. So he coordinates all the service. So if an employer desires to hire an individual with a disability, they can either reach out to one of the employment providers, or they can reach out to Paxton, and him and I can work through that together to get them the candidate who would best fit their needs.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. All right, takes us down to the second item on the regular business, and that is purchase agreement, Franklin County purchase contract. Mr. Gonzalez.
Yes, sir, Chair. We have Todd Sternfeld from NAIA that's going to come up and talk about this item with us. This is for the potential purchase of the Michael Davidson building, which the address is 1305 North 5th. We've been in negotiations and been working through the process. It seems like for 3 or 4 months now, since Mr. Davidson first approached us, but we got Todd involved, and he's been great, and what I think is giving the taxpayers a good deal, especially when you see what it appraised for. And so I'll kind of tee it up. That's how I'm going to tee it up for Todd and let him take it from there. And then if you guys have questions, obviously you'll have to make a decision on whether we want to move forward with the purchase or not. But the contract is online for the public if they want to see that, and it's been there for a few days. So Todd, it's all yours.
Okay. Pleasure to be here again, Commissioners. So it was a big delta that we had. I was here a couple weeks ago. And basically, unfortunately, you weren't here, Mr. Peck, but we had a big delta from 1.4 to what we thought would be 1 million, but we settled at 1.1. The way we reached compromise was my idea was hire a professional appraiser, commercial appraiser. So that's what we did, and I think you all have the appraisal. It took some negotiating back and forth, but I think Mr. Davidson finally gave in and decided at 1.1 would be a fair price. I believe it's a fair price too, especially where the market is. It is not a buyer's market, it's a seller's market. Right now there's 23 listings still out there in Pasco, and I think there was, of them, 3 are business opportunity, 8 are industrial land, 10 are retail, and 3 are office. Really, 2 are office. So there's not much pickings. If you need a space, it's going to be really tough to find a space right now. So my recommendation is to move forward with the purchase.
Questions, commissioners?
Thank you for updating the information. I'm aware generally that it is a seller's market in the residential side of local real estate. I was under the distinct and opposite impression that when it came to office space, that it was in fact, well, I'm thinking back to my source, and
Okay.
I'm probably just gonna withdraw because we all hear various thoughts and opinions about the marketplace, and you mentioned a minute ago that you've got an appraisal on a property, and as I'm talking and thinking, I'm thinking, I'm not sure I want to put my source up against an appraisal. So,
Good idea.
yeah,
Good
yeah,
idea.
Yeah, we all hear lots of things. There's a great deal of office space and commercial space available now. There's at least from what I see out looking at it, maybe not a lot of it right close to where we are and to what our immediate needs might be around the courthouse, but it does seem that there's a lot. Is my perception about that incorrect?
I would disagree with you. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would rate the subject property that you're going to, as A- B class building. All right. To be an A, it would need to be more high tech, more up to date technology inside, those type of things. office building on West Clearwater in Kennewick, and it's a Class A, leaning to Class B. I met with the client, the seller, and I recommended a price per square foot. And they objected to it. They said, okay, we want to go a little bit higher. So I was at about $280 a square foot. They want to start at $303 a square foot. Less than 60 days, we had offers. So the need for people is strong. Okay, and the need for Class A and Class B office building is there. As I mentioned, there's only 2 for sale in Pasco, in the city of Pasco alone. So if you want to do business and you want to open up an office in Pasco, you're limited. The landowners, my experience, the landowners are not, and property owners are not selling because they are full. They're occupied. They don't have vacancy. Office has 5.6% vacancy throughout the Tri-Cities, and it's in different pockets, but overall, it's still a strong market. Is it going to change? I don't know. It could, depending on how people come back to work. Is it a hybrid of office and being at home? I don't have the ball to tell you that, unfortunately. But from my experience, I have more buyers than sellers. I've got one gentleman that subject property that is being bought right now. There's a tenant in there, and they need to leave. Well, I've been looking for 2 months to find a spot for him. I can't find it. He needs 1,500 to 2,000 square feet, Class A, Class B property. It's tough. So he's going to have to work out of his home until we find another spot. But that's my experience. That's what I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah. If I may just follow up, is that experience predicated, and you spoke about West Clearwater, I understand.
Yeah.
Is that experience, are you talking about this geographic proximity to the courthouse, which is geographically where our need is, as opposed to the Tri-Cities as a whole, or do you see no distinction between those two?
I see some distinction. I'm not going to mislead you, but I think the perception has been of Pasco and East Pasco has been a negative one, okay, in the past. People have a stereotype. But my vision or my experience right now, it has been changing, all right? It's been evolving. And I personally bought property in downtown Pasco a couple years ago on Columbia and 5th. So I bought it. I had a client that had a need, and the only thing to do was to purchase a property and convert it and update it for their need. So I updated our building. I spent over $500,000 in fixing it up. So that was a risk, but people are moving here.
It's an interesting perspective. I appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah.
I think we've all heard a lot in the media about people being disinclined to come back to the office and how nationally it's created an oversupply of commercial real estate and office space in particular. And interesting to hear, at least from your perspective, that that's not the case here in Tri-Cities.
Mr. Peck, I would agree with you nationwide.
Right.
Nationwide, but I've lived here only 20 years, okay? And my experience has been, it's kind of a bubble. I've lived in 10 different states, from Los Angeles to Houston, all over, all right? My experience here has been unique. When 2008, 2009 hit, and then 2014, we were getting calls in 2008, 2009, hey, Spokane, they're a lot cheaper than you. I said, well, that's Spokane, right?
Right.
But we don't have, our rates are staying up there. We didn't have the foreclosures in 2008 and 2009 that Seattle had, Portland had, Spokane had.
Yeah.
So,
Well, coincidentally, I've been here 20 years as well.
Okay.
And lived in a whole bunch of places before that, and my experience is very much like you just described.
Yeah.
This does seem to be a bubble for some reason. I'm
Right.
not sure why, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a for your need, it fits your need, and it's about need. If you were to try to build a building like that right now, a 7,000 square foot building, just the shell would be about $200 a square foot. That's not counting finishes, and that's not counting land.
Right.
So you got 1.4 million in just a shell.
Any other questions?
No, I was just going to say is, it's encouraging to hear that we're not being affected by the people from working from home, school kids, going to college from home.
Yeah,
As we own some rentals in College Town, and
yeah.
it's amazing how many students are actually taking their classes at home. So there's a lot of vacancies.
Right.
So it's encouraging to hear that we've escaped those somehow. So
Yeah, we have, and the beauty of where we are, as I've been working in the field, right, I've seen the change in what the Tri-Cities has an X over it, all right? And an X meaning that it has become a distribution hub, all right? People can go to 82 or 84, they can go east, west. I had, just a side story, a number of years ago, a gentleman asked me to sell his property in Boardman, Oregon. It was a 30,000 square foot warehouse on 5 acres of land, which was all basalt rock. Okay? And he wanted 1.3 million. I think, who in the hell would want something like this? I wouldn't pay 500,000 for it. Can't grow anything, you're on basalt rock. Turned out after 1 year, went into a bidding war between a fertilizing company and another company. They wanted it because the switch to the railroad was very close, and they were doing organic fertilizer. They can go to Portland, or they can go to Boise, or they can go straight up. So, and I brought in the oldest foundry in the United States from Latrobe, Pennsylvania, because 25% of their business has been in the Northwest here for the farmers. And they needed to get supplies to them quicker, so they opened up a plant here. So, for whatever that's worth.
It's a good anecdote.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Todd.
So Mike, I know this fits into our campus, and I guess I'm asking, what are the plans for who to move in there?
The preliminary plans is what we've looked at is HR going into there, possibly the commissioner's office. There's meeting space out there, so that's a possibility. Certainly could fit with multiple departments that have run it past. So I think with the 7,000 square feet, there's some unfinished basement space. There's a lot of flexibility. So I think for some minimal additional investment, we can actually expand the use of the space and get some people out of the courthouse that, we have a tendency to feel like we're stuffed into the courthouse. It's beautiful in here, but we're certainly at a lack for space. So I feel like that's sort of our preliminary plan. As we dig into it, I'm certain that'll be flexible and transition. So, but I think it's such a great opportunity, as Todd expressed, to build something of this stature, a minimum 1.4 for the shell. I mean, by the time you get through construction costs, and the fact it has a tremendous amount of parking, so there's not a lack of parking out there. So it really, with the proximity of where it is to our campus, it's just perfect as we continue to grow and serve the citizens of Franklin County, because we really need to. And I think it'll be kind of the first step in that visioning process. If you don't do it now, I kind of worry if we just lay back. It's a good opportunity. We've got the parcel that's just a little bit to the south that's developable. We'd have to rezone that. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to develop, right around this campus. And if any other opportunities arise real estate-wise, I think we could take that opportunity. And I think the other unique thing is we're able to do this with ARPA funding. It fits within the scope of that. So it's a great opportunity to use that funding for something where we can expand our space, get some key departments, out of the courthouse and move some other folks that are really struggling for space into the space that we're currently using. I'll probably maintain an office myself here and go back and forth just because I work with all our elected officials and department heads so closely. But it's a great space and just, I think, a wonderful opportunity. And I want to thank Todd for really guiding us through the process, really encouraging us to get the appraisal. And, the appraisal really was a game changer, probably saved us close to $200,000, of what the initial asking price was.
One other question I wanted to ask you is, have we done any preliminary costs of what we're going to have to put into it to get it ready for us?
I haven't done that yet, Commissioner, and my first step was sort of, because it's been a long process in terms of the negotiation with Michael Davidson. So I just wanted to make sure we can get it first. And I think, and Todd will attest to this, the guts of the building are good. We've had the appraisal, we've done an inspection. I think the biggest thing that I see is the AC is kind of at end of life, but it's still functionable. Michael, I give him a lot of credit. He contracted himself on that building. He's got a lot of pride in it, and it's really well built. So I don't think we're going into a junker. I mean, we're going into a really solid building.
Todd?
To add on to that, I suggested we do a building inspection and an HVAC inspection. So you do have a building inspection that I believe you have.
Yeah, just got complete.
And so there was which is good, there was very little deferred maintenance, all right, on it. The only thing is the useful life of the HVAC unit. Other than that, it has really good bones to it. So I think it's a safe investment, that it's not one that I'm going to put you in that you need to put in $50,000 or $100,000 to take care of it. Could it use some updating? And of course, maybe some new carpet, stretching the carpet, those type of things, make carpet clean and see what happens. But there's always something when most properties are going to be repurposed one way or another. So it's rare that you can just plug and go into buy a building and it's perfect for you. So, but otherwise, I just want to, Mike and I talked about, I recommended doing a building inspection. He gave the green light to do it, just so you were safe on what you were getting. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
The only thing I do see, Commissioner, is the little Scribner errors here. It's labeled 1310 North 5th. I believe, Todd, it's 1305. Is it 1310? I just wanted to make sure, because for some reason I have in my mind it's 1305, which, okay, we're certain on that. just making sure.
So I'd just add an observation here. I've been an advocate for buying this property for several years, and each time we've spoken about it, I've tried to reinforce that one of the customer service challenges we have with our courthouse campus is people having to come through security even to get car tabs or some other, very short time span kind of visit. And I'd very much like us to look at that building, not so much for the convenience of commissioners or anybody else, but for the public that we serve. Any of those kinds of functions where people have to come through security just to drop off a tax payment or to pick up a car tab or something, we really ought to look seriously at putting those in those satellite offices where people don't have to come through security to access those services. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point, because I will say in particular, the assessor's office, I see a lot of senior citizens coming through there, and gosh, they've got to go through the guard shack, and I see walkers, and that was one department I thought about. I'm kind of saying this in public. I'm going to run it by John, but so there's flexibility there, certainly. So I don't think anything at this point is set in stone, but yeah, I just think the opportunity and the flexibility of the building gives us a lot of things to consider, and yeah, I agree. Using it for the public, because that's what we do, is probably the best. So I want to make it a collective decision as I talk to department heads and elected officials, because from security standpoints, there's certain departments that have to be, here, and there's probably others that have more flexibility to be off campus. So yeah, it's all open for discussion.
Would you consider this more of a want or a need?
I think it's a need, Commissioner. We are stuffed like sardines in the courthouse. We've got some properties that we're renting that are really, I would say, not to the level that I'm proud of. But we've done it to save taxpayer dollars. And again, I think because of the space and with a little bit of investment, you can be flexible and creative on who goes in there, depending on the uses. So, and I think as the county continues to grow, it's a necessity. It's been on our radar for many years. It's kind of the right opportunity and the right timing. So I think it really is. I look at it as a great opportunity to expand our campus and, as we continue to grow and provide better services to the public.
Well, I would agree that the space is very convenient, and I think we should look at making it more convenient for the public. So, is that going to be enough space for if you were trying to move planning and anywhere?
We've debated on putting planning in there. It might be a little tight. They've got quite a few employees. So that's an option. I mean, certainly there's enough room if we dedicated planning to one side. The building is kind of unique. It's broken into two sides. So, you could have one side dedicated to one, another side dedicated to another. There's basement space that's unfinished, so plenty of space. Like Todd mentioned, you'd probably have to do a little bit of an investment, but not a ton. And it's move-in ready, so I feel like there's a ton of possibilities for the space.
All right, thank you.
So Mike, on those leases that we're paying currently with inflation, are they going up?
Yeah, Derek's here, and so they've stuck those pretty solidly. Can you address that, please? Thanks.
I have not received anything from the port regarding an increase in rent. They do it based on, I want to say it's the CPI, but I could be wrong on that. But they have some formula they utilize. I usually get that if I'm going to get it next month. Okay. But last year there was an increase.
There was an increase last year?
Between years, yeah. But was that last year? No, I'm sorry, it was the year before that. Last year, I believe we carried through at the same rate. So this year, I don't believe I don't know, but I don't believe there'll be an increase, but in the future, it could happen. It's all based on values and stuff like that. They run these calculations, so.
How many employees do you have?
Well, it's not just me. We also have the weed board, and we have the, but I have, currently there's 9, wait, I always have to remember, including myself, I've got 8, and then Shirley's just moved there, so that's 9 on my side of the building, and then the weed board and the pest board are also in that building. Mm-hmm. They represent another 6 or 7 people. So that's one thing too. If we were to vacate that building, then they would need to vacate that building in order to obtain those cost savings, because we would still be paying. Because what they do is they pay me rent, and then because they're separate entities. Okay. So they pay us, and then we pay the lease on the building.
Okay.
Chair, I've got Jennifer Wagner that just walked in. Jennifer, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but we're talking about the leases at your spaces and some of the challenges that you're going through right now with your space and the port. And can you kind of give an update on what you're paying in rent?
We're paying about $900 rent. We are in lease negotiations right now, and that includes a 20,000 square foot lot that's in the back of our building. I think we have probably about 15,000 square feet in the office portion, which is also utilized for woodworking and other projects that we have going on. The issue that we're having right now is the back portion of our lot where they're saying we're going to go month to month, they know for a fact that we're going to lose it in a year. The Port of Pasco is going to take it back to use for the airport that's in the back of us. So we're kind of looking for another space. We also have the sheriff's evidence vehicles in our space, which is about 15 vehicles right now. It's like they add another vehicle probably every 2 months. But it's a space that we need. We're not, we're short on space right now. We've already gotten kicked out of our storage space from the Port of Pasco, which is an additional 20,000 square feet. We purchased Connex boxes and threw them in the back of our yard to hold that storage, to hold the stuff that was in that storage space and keep it dry. So, so right now we're in lease negotiations, which will double our lease agreement with them on a month-to-month basis, and then kick us out of our the back of our lot. So we're kind of in a bind.
That lot that's just south of this building, how large is that lot that we
Gosh,
own?
what would you say that is, Jennifer?
I offhand, I
it's
wouldn't even want
probably,
to guess.
Gosh, 50 by 50 feet, so.
I'd say a little bit more than that.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's pretty, you'd have to rezone it. It's zoned R1 right now,
But-
so you'd have to do some things.
There's 2 lots. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's 2 lots, and both of them are zoned residential right now. And one of them would be, we could do a shop and a gated area for our items, but there's no way that it would fit the 15 vehicles, evidence vehicles that we have going on right now. So we'd be able to, we have 4 trailers and 4 vehicles at this time, and then 2 Connex boxes. So it would be pretty packed in there with that. So unless we just do 2 gated areas and just leave it as fenced area and storage. So.
But Chair, yeah, I brought Jennifer up and Derek in particular, maybe not as individual departments that may house the new space, but to see the challenges that we face in the future of, how we're really looking at planning, because we've been in these spaces, 20 years in your
At
particular
least
case,
20
so-
years. I know planning's been in theirs for probably about 12, maybe
Right.
10. I was going to say, I know that Jared was the one who decided to move planning out there, and so it was during his tenure here, and so it's been probably about that time.
So this is on my planning radar as we look to the future, because we really got to start thinking about, because we can't stay in these spaces forever.
Yep.
And we know that we can't stay in ours, so, I mean, it's on the horizon right now, so.
Jennifer, have you asked the port about any other space they might have available?
We're working with them currently. They suggested a space right across the street from us, and it was where they used to test parachutes for the military,
Right.
which is, it's just not going to work for us. It's just one giant open space that we can't utilize for offices or to house the stuff that we need to house, and so that portion would not do as well. It's still going to be even more rent than we have right now. I'd like to stay in the building that we have, and then we could move, the stuff that's in our yard. We can put it anywhere really.
So maybe use the space across the street for the storage?
They won't separate it. It's a building and a yard, and that's what I'm worried about is the yard that we're going to lose. So I'm more concerned about our yard, not our office portion. But we're still the rent is going to double. Regardless of whether or not we lose that storage space in the back or the yard in the back.
You said you're currently paying $900 a month for how many square feet?
It's including the yard, and it's about 15,000 square feet for the office or the shop portion of our building. And they're separating the lease, and then they're going to do, it's about $1,700 a month that it's going to go up as soon as we get done with the lease negotiations and figure that out. So
Yeah. Well, it doesn't sound like excessive rent for that much square footage. I realize it's an older building, but I'm curious how those numbers would line up with the local market. It seems $900 a month for what you currently have seems.
oh, it's a blessing. Yeah, we're very lucky to have $900
And
a
even
month
if we
for the
doubled
lot.
it,
Yeah.
even at double, it seems like it's a bargain for that much space. I'm not trying to pitch for the port, but it's
Well,
pretty-
and that's the issue is really how much more money do we want to give the port when maybe we have something else available that we own or we could build or, you know,
Sure.
and that's not a decision for me, so. Anything else?
No, thank you for
Thank
the
you.
impromptu interview. Appreciate it.
So there's no resolution. Are we just,
There's a contract. I'm going to bring in Jeff to kind of give some guidance because I think there's a few ways that we can do it, Jeff. You could either give me the authority to sign, or there are 3 spaces for each commissioner, whether that's necessary that with the contract on hand, if it's agreed upon to purchase. So I'll bring in Jeff for some guidance.
Right, I haven't looked at the signature block for it, but we could certainly do a motion, the commissioners could, to sign the agreement. They could direct Mr. Gonzalez to sign on behalf of the county without a resolution. Or the commissioners could make a motion to sign the document.
but there's nothing more pending? We've done the evaluation of the building.
Right. I think we've done our due diligence for the public in terms of an appraisal, inspection, making sure we work with a realtor. You know, at this point, if the public wants to see the appraisal, they're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'd be glad to send it out, and the inspection report, anything necessary. So I think we've gotten a fair deal and a good deal, and especially in this market, we're just such a unique market for real estate in Tri-Cities, especially for commercial, as Todd mentioned. So we're sort of this bubble in the United States, but I think we've got a good deal, and what I like is it's a good structure with nice bones. It presents well, lots of parking. It's move-in ready and really flexible. And I mean, I would love to have the building because I think it would be really helpful for the public.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Not for you. I had one for the county administrator, but thank you, Jeff.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Jeff.
I think Commissioner Mullen asked a really important question here. It's, I believe, a good building. It's one I've advocated for a number of years for the benefit of the public and easy access to services. It's geographically close to the campus. There's a lot of reasons why it is a good option for us. The question of want versus need, like Mr. Gonzalez, I want us to have this building. But I'm also aware that our resources are limited, and these are ARPA funds, which presents a nice opportunity that we don't normally have to acquire real estate. But I'm wondering if, of the various real estate options and things that we need, if this is our first priority. I don't want to get into too much discussion, take too much time, but there are other structures and buildings and properties close to the campus that I think are significantly higher need, strategic need, than the Davison building. And I'd feel better about this decision if I knew that we had pursued those other opportunities. And if I need to be more specific, I can certainly, but I'd sure rather see us look at some of those other buildings first.
And I know over the years we've looked at the gas station next door, and that guy kind of priced us out.
Yeah, that is the one I'm referring
Yeah,
to.
so he really wanted a tremendous amount.
Have we looked
really-
at that recently?
It's been a couple months since we've looked at it, but he's stayed pretty firm on the price point. Was looking at a parcel across the street just kind of as a visioning project, but they wanted to put apartment buildings on there. We've inquired about the property next door, but they haven't gotten back to us. There's a corrections sort of building there that seems to be for sale, but no one answers the phone. So that we have pursued that. We looked at the building just adjacent to us here on Margaret, and it's interesting that they kind of partition that out into office space, so they're selling parts of it, and the building as a whole was $8 million. I think what it was assessed for, and it just didn't really fit into the way the building was partitioned off. So we have done our due diligence in the area. We also looked at the little doctor's office, and it wound up getting sold before we can negotiate, and so somebody scooped that up. The price point was around $400,000, which we didn't necessarily think it was worth that. So we have looked at several buildings, but I mean, when you look, at apples to apples comparisons or what was available, I acknowledge it, need versus want. I mean, I do think it's a necessity as we grow and try to provide these services and the flexibility of the building. I think, you certainly prioritize the public over your personal. Like, I'm getting a new office, I want to explore all those opportunities first before whatever we consider or wind up with the highest, best use for the taxpayers of Franklin County. I mean, that's what we have to think of first before I think I'm going to get a corner office, or the 3 commissioners are going to get these really nice office spaces off campus. But I think it's a good deal. It's a great opportunity, and I do think it'll be of great service to the public.
Well, Mr. Chair, I just close with one final thought, which is, given the issue of need versus want, availability, price, ARPA funds, all of it rolled up together, I think it would be wise for the county to touch base with the owner of the adjacent property before we consider moving forward on the Davidson building. I think circumstances potentially change for a seller when they see you moving to a different property. I still think the Davidson property is a good one for us. But if we haven't spoken with the property next door in a few months, I think, well, let me rephrase it this way. If it were my money and my building and I was looking to purchase one of the two and I was in this situation, I'd at least make that call just to make sure something hasn't changed before I pull the trigger on this. Because you'd sure hate to go buy the other building and then find out that something has changed and this one's now available, or that our focus on the other building has somehow made this one more negotiable. You've got a real estate background. I certainly don't need to explain further than that.
Is Todd still here, or did he wind up taking off? Yeah, he took off. I mean, my one concern with the proximity of the gas station, really, it's great. I mean, we're going to have to throw some dollars in there, and then you consider it's a gas station, you've got to go through some SEPA mitigation processes potentially, as Derek shakes his head. I mean, you're going to have, can you kind of step in, because there's, my economic development background, you kind of step into some things especially when you're in a gas station situation. Can you kind of lend some context to that?
Yeah, because I'm assuming we wouldn't want to keep operating a gas station if we took over the building.
No, that obviously not.
So, so the tanks would need to be decommissioned. There would be some costs associated with that. The tanks would actually have to be removed, and then that space filled.
Or you could simply separate the property.
Well, yeah, I don't know the properties well, but
Right.
yeah, let's put it this way: if you're going to get rid of the gas pumps, they need to be vacated. But if they're going to keep operating, then they'll be able to continue.
Yeah, I would separate them off, sell them to a contractor who wants to provide fueling for the sheriff's fleet. Anyway, my point was simply that for the price of a phone call, it'd be nice to have that reassurance.
Yeah, and I do have a real estate license for the record, but besides that, I think you have to weigh, you're going to have to put a lot of dollars into that we don't necessarily have. We've got a bird in the hand, that old saying, the one in the bush, they could both get away. So I just feel like we're in this opportunity zone. I think we can't let this one pass. But I'll still make that call, all due respect, and see where they're at, because, I think that's more of a long-term play and strategy, in the future.
I agree with you. I think it is. I appreciate your willingness to make the call. And boy, wouldn't we feel foolish if we bought the other building and this one came up in 3 months. So I think the call is well advised. Thank you for agreeing to do that.
Absolutely.
So another week wouldn't be pressing on this, would it, to make that call?
Well, certainly not. It's up to you guys. You want to delay. I would recommend not delaying.
Okay.
So.
Well, I would concur with Commissioner Peck that we need to make that call.
Okay, so we'll go one more week, make the call, and see what.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Gonzalez. Next on the agenda is the contract, the draft, HAPO Center Management and Operations Service Draft Contract. Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the service contract we've been talking about. On the phone, I've got Marshall Myers and Wes Harris. I've got Joel Morgan here, HAPO Center Manager. He may want to weigh in. He's welcome to step up to the mic. Just some context, we gave the city of Pasco an opportunity to weigh in. They appreciated that. So Marshall was able to get kind of the latest edits, and which I sent to your guys' inbox this morning. Teresa, our clerk, has printed those out for you, so you should have those in front of you right now. So it's been a robust process, and hopefully we're close to the finish line here, and we score a touchdown. So, gentlemen from HOL, can you guys hear us okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful.
Very good.
Thank you. I didn't say Larry Leisure was there, so forgive me for that. I don't know if you are there, but.
He was not actually able
Okay.
to make it onto the call.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Marshall. And I'll bring Jeff Briggs in too, if you want to step up to the mic, just in case there's any questions. And
Is there any questions, commissioners?
Mr. Gonzalez, the email that came out this morning, I don't believe it had Exhibit A and B attached, so I didn't have the opportunity to look at those until just now. And if they were attached, I couldn't find them on my email. I'm curious, in Exhibit A, Item 1, the management fee, in the RFP process, and if my memory fails me and I get numbers wrong, please don't hesitate to correct me, but I seem to recall that they had bid $20,000 a month for the management fee, and somewhere in the process, and I don't recall us having this discussion, this fee changed from a sliding scale starting at 15 and going up to 35. Which would average out over the 5 years to $24,000 a month, which would be about a 20% increase in those management fees. So maybe we could start with that. Could you help me understand when and how that change took place?
Just through the negotiation process on the front end, they were willing to give in a bit, and hopefully as we get to the fourth and fifth year and they're generating revenue, sort of incentivizes that contract. And I'll let Marshall Myers weigh in terms of how that process played out.
Yes, sir. Mr. Peck, Mr. Gonzalez basically described it perfectly. You mean the initial time frame at the beginning of the contract we don't anticipate necessarily being as financially successful as we are at the end of it. I mean, it gives us more headway at the beginning to be, more runway at the end of the contract, where we have some flexibility in some of the leases that are there currently, more usage of some of the spaces, the ability to have time to book larger events into the facility, and it just gives the county some flexibility financially.
Okay, thank you. Seems it also increases the payout term, since termination for convenience on the contract has us buying out a portion of the remainder of the contract, and those would be the higher dollar months, but I'm not going to belabor that point. I think the point about easing into it is valid as well. And they're not especially large dollars. I just want to understand who made that decision, because I don't recall the board doing it, but we're not to approving the contract yet anyway. I wanted to ask about the binding arbitration. Is Jeff still here? Oh, there you are. Sorry, I'm looking out in the audience.
That's fine.
When last we spoke with Harris White and they were here, they kindly acknowledged that they had accepted all of my changes and recommendations. And one of those is in section 11, which obligates us to binding arbitration, which I suggested was for this professional services contract not appropriate, especially when it appears to be potentially a conflict with a termination for convenience clause as well. And yet I see that that is still in this contract that is marked at the bottom clean copy, which I presume means all the changes have been made. And I think there are some others here as well. Like I say, I didn't have attachments A and B to look at these previously, but maybe I'll defer my further questions and look those up while other people ask their questions.
I think I see where you're going with this, Commissioner Peck, if I may.
Please.
When a court would interpret a contract or an attorney, you sort of have to read the whole document in harmony with all the provisions.
Right.
So the way that I see this is really if you're doing dispute resolution, it doesn't prejudice your right to terminate for cause. That's not a breach of the contract.
But I didn't
So-
say cause.
Pardon me?
I didn't say cause. I was referring to a potential conflict with the T for C, termination for convenience.
Right, termination for convenience.
Yeah, does it conflict with that?
No.
Okay.
Right. I don't see that as a conflict. You could still, you could still terminate for convenience, and if there's any dispute arising under the contract, generally it would be a dispute over whether a party breached the agreement. That would be where you'd be using the alternative dispute resolution, but it wouldn't make sense to do that for an instance where you're doing a termination for cause, because the agreement allows that. So that wouldn't be a breach by either party.
So I think we can leave cause out of it for a minute, because I'm talking specifically about termination for convenience and the fact that that is in virtually every county contract I've ever can recollect in 15 years. And the purpose for that is that if circumstances change for the county for any reason,
Right.
maybe it's a change in funding, it could be anything. It gives us the opportunity to exit with little or no penalty, or whatever the terms of the contract are. But if we've got another part of the contract in a dispute resolution that obligates us to binding arbitration, I believe those two are in conflict. And while I acknowledge that you're the attorney and I'm not, I've had this conversation with other attorneys. And if we're in the middle of a discussion, a negotiation that leads to binding arbitration, and we simply say, well, we're gonna T for C and walk away, are we precluded from doing that, or is that viewed as bad faith? That's the conflict
yeah,
I'm seeing,
I
is
see-
that you've got two competing
Right.
processes.
Right. It would be very fact sensitive, that sort of inquiry, but basically this is allowing us, and I think it's a good provision, by the way, to allow for alternative dispute resolution, but I also understand that in your comments, you wanted to remove it, and we were accepting your comment, so I understand that, that as well, so,
And it's the binding arbitration
And
piece. It's not the
right.
negotiation piece.
right,
Negotiating in good faith, I think, is always a good path.
right,
It's when the county forgoes its T for C authority and hands the decision over to an independent third party in binding arbitration who
right,
decides what the decision is and how much. When you take that authority out of the hands of the county, you've gutted termination for convenience, my opinion.
right. And I don't know that you have, you could still terminate for convenience, but if there is a breach that arose under the agreement before that, it might still be subject to binding arbitration.
But it doesn't even have to be a breach.
It might make that arbitration moot if you've terminated. It depends on the nature of the dispute.
Well, and that was my question, really, from a couple weeks ago, is aren't these in conflict? Are we committed to binding arbitration or not? Does termination for convenience trump that? If we don't like the way the binding arbitration discussion is going, can we simply say, well, it's been great, but termination for convenience, and we're out? And in this case, where there is a payout for termination for convenience, I think the two could potentially live together in a document, but only because of the consideration. And that's what I wanted to be assured of. The original consideration terms were extensive. They were the county had to pay 50% of all the year's remaining value on the contract, which by my math originally in the contract was close to $500,000 if we terminated for convenience at the end of year one. Now, when those numbers got scaled back and the buyout, the payout for termination for convenience was reduced, then it became, I thought, less egregious, more tolerable. But the question still remained, does that or does that not conflict with the termination for convenience? And when there was that very high buyout, it leveraged the county unduly.
Right.
So if you tell me that the binding arbitration clause does not in any way inhibit the county's ability to terminate for convenience, then I'm good.
Right, it doesn't. But
Okay.
I'm also not saying that the arbitration clause wouldn't survive termination and that process might play out.
Well, then it does conflict, in my opinion. Thank you for making that distinction.
Okay?
Yeah, we're either bound to it or we're not.
Right,
The fact that it survives termination for convenience and we're continued to go through that process and continuing to subject ourselves to a decision by a third party as to how much the county is liable, if that survives termination for convenience, then that's the conflict. If we can't terminate for convenience,
right.
clean and simple,
Right, but let's say we get rid of these alternative dispute resolution
Right.
provisions, we could still terminate for convenience and be sued for breach under the agreement, right? And that process would play out. So the benefit of having alternative dispute resolutions is you have a faster result, right? You're not waiting for years in litigation. You can have a faster turnaround in arbitration. And so
I'm not
parties
willing-
that are,
I'm sorry.
I'm saying parties that are trying to work together and, have a good working relationship, they oftentimes want to have these sort of provisions in place so that they can quickly resolve any disputes, and that's sort of the purpose of it.
Yeah, well, I'll leave it with this. I'm not opposed to, and I agree with your comments about the value of alternative dispute resolution processes. No issue, no problem there. It's binding arbitration where if the two sides can't agree and it goes to an independent third party paid by the county and the other party, I think is how it spells out, we now put that decision authority in the hands of someone else.
Right.
I can't recall another county contract in 15 years that had this. Surely there must be one if it's a good process, but I can't recall one. And so my point is simply not the negotiation process. We should negotiate in good faith. It's the binding arbitration piece, which is the third step, that is creating heartburn for me. Now, you've, I think, articulated nicely the other things that could happen.
Right.
If we terminate it for convenience in the middle of the negotiation process, they might sue us. Well, you know what? Anybody can sue us anytime, and they
Right.
do.
Right.
So, we can,
Right.
I think we've exhausted enough of the people's time. If you've got anything you want to add, I'm all ears, but I think I've heard what I need.
No, I mean, other than I'm here to provide legal analysis, not whether or not the county's inclined to go one way or another on a given provision.
Sure.
Sure. All right.
Marshall, anything HWL wants to add to that?
Yeah, Mr. Peck, if somebody would suggest some language changes in there, we would be amicable to it. I believe that language actually came from the county. That's not language that we inserted into that contract.
Well, I appreciate the clarification. It was in my comments from prior to last week's meeting when I was told that all my comments have been incorporated, and they've not, but that's okay. I don't need to belabor the point. Thank you, though, for...
And Mr. Peck, can I clarify that?
Please.
So when Mr. Harris spoke last week, when he said that we accepted all of the changes in the contract, that was all of the actual edits that were made to the contract itself in the word processing format we were using. So all of the actual changes that were incorporated in the document that I believe you had typed up yourself, we literally just accepted those in Microsoft Word.
Oh,
all of the comments to the side we had to manually enter, and to be honest with you, that may have been overlooked, or maybe there was conversation that needed to happen. But all of the physical edits that you made were accepted into the document.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. The physical changes were grammaticals and minor word changes. Well, some of them not so minor because they went from shall to may. But there were the more substantive comments were just that. They were comments. I didn't feel free to completely rewrite the document, which would have been necessary to do those as text edits, so I made those as comments in the margin. And my understanding was that you had accepted all the changes and comments, but now I understand what you meant is that you accepted them in the document. There are other comments in the margin that I think need to be addressed, but thank you for...
And to be upfront with you, I believe I would almost assert that all of those are either in the document or are acceptable to us. I mean, whether it be the termination, early termination fee or anything along those lines, we're open to all of that. It's not that we're opposed to it. We just would, instead of having 50 back and forth on, hey, there should be a period here or a comma here or terminology changes, we would ask that you make one change to the document, and it's something that we can take a look at and approve instead of going back and forth 50 times with 50 different parties.
Yeah, well, I've only made one change, or one set of edits, comments, changes, whatever, however you want to phrase it. I've not engaged in the back and forth. I provided them in writing one time. But I do think that we would all benefit from seeing a copy of what is, in fact, the latest complete document. This one provided to us this morning, I don't believe is that document. Thanks.
Teresa, what you printed out this morning, was that the forward from Marshall Myers this morning? Do you have access to a printer up here? Yeah. So.
Mr. Gonzalez, at the bottom of the document, it should say final.
Does not.
Let's see.
Yeah, the bottom of this document says draft revision.
Yeah, so in your guys' email, I sent you at 6:43 this morning. Let's see.
I have, it is for the purchase. Maybe one for the purchase.
Okay, let's see.
No for the, HAPO.
Okay, let me. You guys have access to email up here or no?
You can send that.
I just sent it to you. Yeah.
So the one you sent.
Mr. Gonzalez, it doesn't sound like they have received everything. Maybe we should hold off until they've had time to review.
No, that's okay, Wes. And I think you indicated, Commissioner Peck, you have it in your email that you were looking at just now.
Yeah, I've gotten a
Okay.
couple of different ones. I just saw the one from 7:04 this morning. which is from you.
Yeah, that was forwarded from Marshall this morning.
Yeah, at 7 a.m.
That's
this
the-
morning. I
yep.
hadn't seen that before the meeting.
So I got the email, but was replied instead of a forward, therefore I didn't see it.
Can you print it out right now and hand it to, thank you.
Does this version that's being printed out include the comments from the city of Pasco?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Are they just noted, or have we just accepted them in this document?
Marshall, how did you deal with that? Because I reviewed them, then forwarded them to HWL. And as we spoke, Marshall, most of them had been addressed on your side, hadn't they previously?
Yep. As to my comments earlier, where 50 different people are making comments to different versions of the document, they were actually reviewing a version of the document prior to Mr. Peck's comments, and most of the changes they requested or notated were already things that Mr. Peck had pointed out. There were a few minor changes. One of them was they requested, instead of a two 1-year extension options at the end of the contract, they noted that the RFP actually had 1 2-year extension. So that was one of the changes made. And the only change that I would say we did not accept and put into the document were changes to the last 2 sections of the prior to the appendixes, section 33 and 32. No, 33, just 33, the initial budget and master plan. They requested just some more timeline information put into the document. And I discussed with Mr. Gonzalez that my only concern with putting firm dates in there as far as like budgeting and master plan is we're kind of at the behest of the commission. Because, if we might provide you a draft budget or a draft master plan, we don't have any ability to say, hey, we need this back by February 1st so we can make changes and give you a final version. That was our only concern with the city's comments.
afraid to run out of paper.
Yeah, I was was wondering where the other 13 pages were. Thank you.
That was complete one. I'll give you one.
Marshall, I'm just making sure you guys are still with us. We're still here.
As are we. You guys take
Okay,
your time.
wonderful. Thank you.
So, Mike, has Pasco gotten this final draft?
They have not received this final draft, but as Marshall mentioned, they weighed in. I mean, I would say all of them have been addressed. So,
Okay.
I mean, I think we've been as communicative and as good of partners as we've ever been in this process. So,
Yeah, they've got to view it before it was signed. And I
Oh,
don't think
absolutely.
previous
You know,
contracts were signed they were signed before they even reviewed it.
Yeah, so I've been working with their city manager, Adam Lincoln, so we've exchanged several emails, and so I think they're appreciative of that process.
So were all of the city's comments, recommended edits incorporated?
Yeah, they've been incorporated. And Marshall, I want to get you into this conversation. Most, if not all, have been incorporated, right? That's my understanding.
Almost all of them,
Yeah.
Yes. Whether it was prior to them making their comments, because as I said, Mr. Peck's notations addressed a lot of them. Some of them were minor grammatical stuff. And then the main one that I would point out that was not inserted into this addresses the timeline of the master plan
Right.
and the budget, just because we don't have complete control over that process.
And Chair, permission to speak.
Yes, go ahead, Mr.
In terms of this master plan that they're going to provide, if you know what that costs in terms of dollar value, it's pretty extensive. So I want the public to know that, you know, in addition to the service they're going to provide, HWL is going to bring sort of that economic development lens to the table in terms of sort of the visioning strategy, which is worth thousands of dollars, in some cases hundreds of thousands. So, and that is an investment they're willing to make on their own accord and really work with us in partnership and in conjunction with the city of Pasco. I know Larry Leisure's already reached out to Adam Lincoln, and you know, I've extended that olive branch to get that communication process going. So the communication is going to be robust, and I think they're committed to that for all of us working in conjunction.
And have they reached out to the hockey club and talked to the?
They have. So, I mean, one of the first things that I did was make connection emails to just about every partner in the Tri-Cities, whether it's Visit Tri-Cities, whether City of Pasco, the HAPO Advisory Board, you name it, Marshall. I think I connected you with quite a bit of stakeholders, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say the advisory board meeting that we attended, not myself, but Mr. Leisure and Mr. Harris attended last week, was super helpful as well, getting all of those parties connected. And once we have, I would say authority, once this contract's signed, that kind of gives us a little more leeway to not only say hi and how's it going to those parties, it kind of gives us some ability to actually interact with them with some substance.
Yep. I believe everybody's got a chance to review the contract. Is there any other questions?
Three observations. First is on page 6. Under section 21, conflict resolution, subparagraph C, arbitration. Binding arbitration is still in here. For me to be willing to support this contract, there needs to be a note that says that binding arbitration does not survive termination for convenience. On page 19, there is a similar reference in Exhibit B, termination for, it says clause, it should be cause, top of the page, page 19. Termination for convenience, Exhibit A, of Exhibit B, paragraph A, under the county's right to terminate. There needs to be a note added there similar to on page 6, making clear that if the county elects termination for convenience, that the binding arbitration obligation does not survive and the T for C becomes the basis. I don't know what the city has provided in the way of comments, not because I haven't seen them in passing during this meeting, but for two reasons. One, the language as to what has been accepted from the city is kind of waffled back and forth between we accepted all of them to we accepted most, if not all, to some of them conflicted. And those are all reasonable attempts to describe the coordination with the city, and I think that's because we haven't had time to look at them and compare the quote-unquote final document with what the city actually sent. I do acknowledge that that email came out at 7 o'clock this morning, but I've not had time to sit down and go through it and compare those. So those are my three comments. We've already had a 2-to-1 vote on this contract. My support of this would require understanding what the city has proposed and whether or not we've adopted those, and if not, we need to go back to the city and express to them that we're not adopting those inputs. And my guess is they'll say, well, okay, that's fine, it's your contract, but I think we owe them that professional courtesy. Whether we've been that courteous in the past or not is really irrelevant. It's what we need to do now. And page 6 and 19 were the other two edits.
Well, seeing that the other two commissioners haven't been here in the past and you have, I guess that would be why you want to make it irrelevant, but we've heard from our attorney, and I think we're okay with the arbitration, the way it's written. He sort of made that clear, so I'm good with the contract the way it's written.
And Mr. Briggs, you feel comfortable with the way the contract is?
I was trying to think of where I pulled this language from. As Harris White Leisure points out, it was provided by the county. This is from our recent Moon Security contract, which was in conjunction with Benton County, where we had an agreement with Moon Security for the, it was in relation to drug court, which I would say was a personal services agreement with Moon Security, and we had these provisions in there, and that was adopted by both counties as well as Moon Security. But it's certainly the county's prerogative whether they want to strike that language and sign the agreement or not. If the county is inclined to execute this agreement, I would advise the county to make a motion to do that to Mr. Gonzalez, and to have it with the caveat that he be able to make any like Scrivener changes, like Scrivener errors. There's a few
Final edits.
typos in here, nothing that's substantive, but for example, if county's not capitalized or there's a misspelling, as Commissioner Peck pointed out, those are the sorts of things that would be constituted Scrivener's error, nothing that substantively changes the contract, even if it were an error. So again, a motion to have Mr. Gonzalez sign the agreement would be the appropriate action.
Mr. Briggs, motions to approve contracts really are outside the review for form, respectfully. Secondly, I don't believe there's anything in my comments that recommended striking the termination, or excuse me, the binding arbitration. What I said was that a note added to that, noting that in the case of T for C, the T for C would overcome the binding arbitration. I think that's a wholly different approach than striking the binding arbitration paragraph, which is what you were speaking to.
Right, and
Would you have an objection to that approach?
it's, like I said, Commissioner, it's not my call. From the prosecutor's office, we're the legal advisor to the county, and so
Well,
we don't, we don't.
you've just issued an opinion
Right.
about striking it, and I'm just asking for clarification on that opinion. Would it be equally acceptable in terms of its legal efficacy to simply add a note that said that termination for convenience would overcome the binding arbitration obligation?
It does, and you talked about good faith earlier. It does seem silly to keep the clause in at all if we're going to, midway through an arbitration, sort of take our toys and go home sort of thing and say, well, we're terminating now, and that's no longer binding. That sounds like the sort of thing that an attorney might say is bad faith when they come back later and sue us because they can't arbitrate any longer.
Thank you for
But-
articulating the conflict of interest between the two portions of the contract that I've been speaking to all along. That's exactly the heart of it, is that when you have them both in there, it creates that uncertainty about which one survives.
Right, and there is a survival clause in there. I'm sure you noticed that, and dispute resolution provisions would typically survive termination, but with the amendment that you're proposing, where we're expressly saying that it doesn't survive, then it wouldn't, and that would create the conundrum that I was describing.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you for clarity on the rule of law. All right.
Permission to speak, Chair. And I just,
Mr. Gonzalez.
and I appreciate this robust discussion, and thank you, Jeff, for all your hard work, and thank you, HWL. But I want to let the public know when I think we've done our due diligence to protect the county, and when I look at the previous management contract, it's literally 5 pages. This current one is over 22, 25 pages. This is littered with bullet points and not much protection for the county. So and the point being,
And
is
by the
that
way,
we-
was that reviewed by our legal?
yes, it was. So
If I may, that was, I mean, and we appreciate everything that prior contractor did to help.
absolutely.
Yes.
That was reviewed very expeditiously on an emergency. We need to get this done because we don't have someone managing the facility. This needs to happen, and we'll figure it out later type of, so obviously when you look at that old agreement, there's a lot to,
Yeah, compared to, and I just wanted to compare and contrast what we're going over now. You know, for the public to know that we are doing our due diligence here.
And open and
we did-
transparent, by
yeah.
the way, too.
So, and, you know, comparatively speaking, so.
Yep.
Yeah, I would concur. We're doing our due diligence, and the fact that the last contract wasn't as robust as this one is an indication that we're all seeking to do better in each iteration moving forward. Very much like our past coordination with the city. We can and will continue to do better. So thank you for your piece of that.
hey, oh, you're welcome.
All right. So if we're done, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion that we move forward with the signing of the contract and granting Mr. Gonzalez, the county administrator, the right to rectify any scrivener's errors.
I'll second. There's been a motion and a second to adopt the contract and allow Mr. Gonzalez to clean up any Scribner errors. Is there any further discussion?
I just note that there's an old saying that sometimes it doesn't seem like there's time to do the right thing the first time, but there always seems to be time to do it a second time to fix the errors from the first time. In this case, I think because the contractor has already begun work and they're already engaged, we would do well to take a breath, reach out to our friends at the city and make sure that they're aware that we've accepted some, but perhaps not all of their edits, and that we then come back and make a final vote on this next week. And for that reason, because I don't think it's quite ready, and because I think we owe that respect to the city, I will abstain from the vote rather than vote nay or in favor. Thank you.
Chair, permission to
Mr.
speak.
Gonzalez.
And I do want to put it on the record that I did offer for us to go this past Monday to speak with the city council and talk about it in public. And Mr. Lincoln said, you know, I'll provide the edits and then provide them to you. So I think on multiple occasions, and I feel good about this. I've reached out to the city. I have extended an olive branch. I have had an open door policy. I mean, probably more than any county administrator in the past decade. So I feel good about where we are.
Thank you. So there's been a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Note that Commissioner Peck abstained. All right.
Mr.
Next.
Chairman, if I may.
Commissioner Peck.
I would invite us all to review the, the rules for basic parliamentary procedure and as to which parties may or may not speak when there's a motion on the table being considered by the body. So for future reference, if we could take a look at that.
Well, we have
Thank
tried to
you.
bring back our code of conduct, and it hasn't met your criteria yet. But when Mr. Gonzalez, as acting on our part, is asked to speak, I am going to allow him to speak. So with that, we'll move down to item D, Resolution 2023-276, appointing Andrew. Andrew, could you help me with your last name? Workala. To our Mid-Columbia Libraries Board of Trustees, ending 12/31/2025. So welcome.
Thank you. So if you have any questions of me, I'm here to answer what I can.
I appreciate that. I'd be interested in your thoughts on the relative value of very small satellite library offices in rural areas.
I think they're of great value. I grew up on the west side. I guess based on my own personal experience as a youth in Pacific County on the west side, we did not have a library. We had a bookmobile that came to our school. I don't remember the frequency, probably about once a month or so. And to have that resource readily available, I think is invaluable. People in rural, remote areas may not have they have the means, but maybe it's a major inconvenience to try to get into town to one of these brick and mortar libraries. So I think it's of great value.
I appreciate those comments. There is a very small brick and mortar facility behind Mr. Quick's up at Merrill's Corner that the library board entertained closing several years ago, and we're appreciative of their response to our objections and kept it open. So I'm happy to hear that you see the value in those. Thank you.
Okay.
No question.
So as far as that goes, I live out in Eltopia, and we used to have a bookmobile too. And we got the brick and mortar, and it's used quite heavily there at Merrill's Corner. So I got a couple questions. Who's in charge of the library's book selection, the librarian or the Board of Trustees?
The librarian.
The librarian.
My understanding is the head librarian and his management team are responsible for the day-to-day operations of the library. The trustees, of course, oversee that performance of of the library system. The head librarian reports to the Board of Trustees as, I guess, his supervisor or supervisors, if you will. So the Board of Trustees will set and approve policy. They'll approve the proposed annual budget. I've reviewed that for this last year, and I've looked at the strategic plan. I think one of the big goals for the Board of Trustees is to champion the library system and try and maximize or optimize use of the system, and get participation from a lot of the commercial entities in the Benton Franklin counties to kind of participate and contribute to the support of the system.
Okay. Do you believe there should be any restrictions on who can read to children and on the books that they can read from?
Well, I don't believe there should be any restrictions on who could read to children unless they've got if they're felons or something like that. Maybe there's some legal restrictions on that. As far as what they can be read to, yes, I don't know where those boundaries are, but I believe there's certain types of material that is not appropriate for children, may belong in a different section of the library. I don't believe in censorship or pulling books out of the library, but I do believe that there is a set of material that's appropriate, age appropriate, and that needs to be dealt with.
Thank you. And then one last question. Do you believe there should be restrictions on books whose subject matter involves sexual orientation, gender identity, and adult content in the children's book section?
I think it needs to be age appropriate, and that's a great question.
We've got a big discussion going on here recently back in the Senate, and when the senator read some of the clips from the books that he read from, it was shocking to the people what was available to children.
And I guess I have to admit, I am not. My kids are growing up. It's been a long time since I've been in a library with them. The children's books that I remember of my own were
Dr. Seuss.
Pretty plain. But I do think somebody needs to be looking at that and making those kinds of determinations. And I do think that is the job of the management team with the assistance of the Board of Trustees. So I think we have a role to play. I'm not smart enough, I guess, or knowledgeable enough to know exactly what that material looks like today to tell you where that line should be drawn.
Okay, and then do you guys have the ability to fire a librarian if you feel like they're out of order?
I don't know the answer to that specifically. I'm still getting up to speed on the library, the RCW. I think it's 2712. I haven't really read through that yet. But if my understanding is correct, as the bosses, if you will, of the head librarian, that either we have that authority or we are at least obligated to come to the commissioners of Benton and Franklin County to deal with that, should there be any problems there.
Okay. Well, I thank you, and I thank you for stepping up to serve this role, and I just hope that we can keep our kids, their minds, like Rush Limbaugh used to say, are full of mush at that age, and they're very vulnerable, so we got to make sure that they aren't getting the wrong things in their minds.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Is there any other questions? Thank you very much.
You bet.
So we have a
Move to approve Resolution 2023-276 in the matter of appointing Andrew Porcala, best I could do, to the Mid-Columbia Library's Board of Trustees ending 12/31/2025.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for Resolution 2023-276. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? I abstain from voting. I don't think we have enough information, so I'm just going to abstain. The motion passes. Next on the agenda, we have an ordinance 2023-08. It's a public hearing on proposed critical areas ordinance. Mr. Bratton, and at this time, I will open the public hearing. Please present.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to do the introduction. Most of the work was done by our consultant, AHBL, regarding this matter. This is a review and update associated with the critical areas ordinance for the county. It is a mandated update that follows the adoption of your comprehensive plan. So AHBL's been working on that. It's effectively a combing through our codes, our existing critical areas ordinance, to ensure that any changes that have occurred over the years since the last time we updated it, say at the state level, requirements, things like that, that those are incorporated in our critical areas ordinance, as well as ensuring that the current best available science that we have listed, and that's a lot of the appendix in the back where you just see all those like different names and agencies and various other resource materials. That's the best available science. Those are the metrics that folks are supposed to be using when they're looking to do something in a potential critical area ordinance or a critical area, and or for staff to determine whether and what those impacts or efforts may be. But I'm going to now turn this over to Emily because she's the one who did most of the work on this, and we're quite happy with the material.
Thank you, Derek. Greetings, commissioners. I am Emily Weimer with AHPL. I have presented to you before. It's good to be back. This is an update proposed for your critical areas ordinance, or your CAO, which is chapter 18.08. Now, this chapter was last updated in 2012, so it's quite due for an update at this point. Franklin County has 5 critical areas, and those are wetlands, critical aquifer recharge areas, so drinking water, frequently flooded areas, geologically hazardous areas, slide hazards, steep slopes, things like that, and lastly, fish and wildlife habitat areas. Now, as Derek mentioned, the CAO uses what's called best available science, which is all that scientific information applicable to the critical areas. And that was prepared by a sub-consultant, our technical sub-consultant. So this update proposes changes not only to your code, but to the best available science, which is adopted in that ordinance as well. So it's really important to keep this section of the code current. Among the numerous reasons, it keeps the community safe from these hazards. It gives clear and reasonable expectations for developers. It fulfills ongoing requirements of the GMA. And lastly, it helps protect the natural features of the county. So it's important to note out that we are not proposing any changes to the CAO maps that are maintained by the county. We did not conduct any field work in order to review any of those maps. That was not funded or a part of this proposal. The proposed code amendments address changes to various state laws. We beefed up some of the provisions. We clarified a lot of the things that were already in there that were or are unclear. We updated based on best practices and based on that best available science that the sub-consultant created. And we considered changes to local plans and regulations. And finally, we updated to address the local circumstances because a lot has changed since 2012. So we had to go through and review everything that has changed. The proposal was routed to various technical reviewers and stakeholders. So I went through SEPA environmental review, and notice was provided according to state law and Franklin County Code. In terms of comments, we only received 2, and those are from state agencies. In consultation with staff, we reviewed those technical comments and incorporated some of those changes that were relevant. So your Planning Commission held a public hearing on the amendment, and then subsequently, they did forward a recommendation of approval to you. So we have prepared an ordinance in order to amend that Franklin County Code Chapter 1808, and that does include amending the best available science. So in conclusion, we do recommend approval of the ordinance that we have prepared to amend Franklin County Code Chapter 1808 related to critical areas. And I know, there's a lot of changes, so I'm available to answer any of those technical questions you have. Thank you.
Questions, commissioners?
Critical areas are pretty diverse in their nature. You named off some of them. One of them is steep slopes. I'm trying to recall, is there a specific grade or percentage? Is it like 10% grade or something? Do you recall?
I believe it's 15%.
It's 15, so.
15%.
0 to 15, we don't consider an issue. 15 to, I want to say 45 is where we start getting into questions where we may do a site assessment or something like that. And then beyond that is a mandated geotech. And then also structural things could trigger that, but that's generally how it's addressed, so, yeah.
And in addition, it's not just slope. There are other factors like history of slides, the soil type, things like that. So there's a few factors.
Water. Right. And I'm sorry, Derek, I'm not sure I understood. We use 15 degrees roughly, or 15%, which is 15% slope. And we consider those critical habitat, 0 to 15?
No,
Oh,
after
it's-
15.
it's after
I
15.
apologize, yeah.
No,
Up
you've
to
said
that-
it right. I
yeah,
just
up
wanted-
to that point where it's at, when it hits that 15 degree, we start getting to where we may have to do a site visit or something like that. And then there's eventually a point where regardless, based on the slope, you will be required to do a full-blown geotech report.
Yeah. Is there any percentage of slope where it's just a flat no?
I like to say if you have the money, you can do pretty much anything.
Okay, all right, I understand. I understand. But there's nothing in this code language that says if you're at 60%, the answer is no, period, don't ask.
Correct.
It's all subject to
yeah,
science.
if you can engineer it and you
Okay.
can want to pay for it, we'll probably get out of your way.
Okay, thank you.
Page 38.
38. Any other questions? Okay. I'm all like, what is that peak range? I can't remember it. The 15% triggers.
Yeah, well, you and I had a conversation quite a long time ago about certain lands of long-term, LTACs and long-term significance, and some of those had some steep slopes, and I wondered how they could be both, but now I understand. It depends on the local conditions.
Here, I finally have it. So areas with erosion and or landslide hazard area refers to those areas in Franklin County that are areas with a 15% to 39% slope, areas with a slope that is 40%. So in that 15 to 39%, that's where we kind of, sometimes we'll make them do it, sometimes we won't, depends on the variable.
Situation dependent.
At 40%, you're doing one. You're doing a geotech analysis.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
good, thank you.
Any other questions? I got one question. How come wasn't desert listed as one of the critical areas? Because this was a desert at one time.
I'll let you answer that.
You do have a critical habitat area, which
Oh.
does have shrub strip.
Okay.
There are areas identified for protection based on shrub
Yeah,
strip.
because we have the park out there, and I think that's one of those areas. So, thank you. That was my only question. So this is a public hearing. Is there anybody from the public that would like to weigh in on this? Is there anybody on the phones? There is nobody. I don't see nobody getting up. Is there any other questions from the commissioners? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Move to approve ordinance 2023-08 as presented in the matter of a public hearing for the proposed critical areas ordinance update.
Second.
Been a motion and a second for ordinance 2023-08. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Moves us down to public comment. Is there anybody
Thank
for
you.
public comment? Thank you. Just come to the mic here at the podium.
Okay. Rebecca Olbrecht from Benton County. First, thank you for moving the the approval of the recommendation of the trustee, Mr. Workola, off of the consent agenda. I think we've dodged a bullet. Thank you for your questions. It's put them on alert. Just this morning, I went to this site on the Mid-Columbia Library website. It lists on this article, ACLU, Black Lives Matter, Color of Change, Equal Justice Initiative, NAACP, Southern Poverty Law Center, the King Center founder, plus a lot of controversial, let's pull out the race card references. That has recently been updated. The application process needs to be watched. I applied, but I obviously was not in the time frame to be interviewed. Where I did find it advertised on Facebook, it said applications would be accepted until the position is filled. I sent it in. They sent back and said it's not within the right time frame. I pointed out to them that it said until the position is filled. So then they sent my application and resume through, but they never interviewed me. So it's a process that I'm focused on, not the job. I mean, I do want the job, but if we can get the process to go through and the public are aware of what's going on, we need to do that. And I appreciate you guys for moving off the agenda. Also, when you review his application and his education and personal development, do it carefully. There are some key words in here. Leadership for a democratic society. This country is not a democracy. It's a republic. And a quote by Karl Marx, democracy leads to socialism. Socialism leads to communism.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment? Nobody on the phones? Nobody getting up. That takes us down to Commissioner Administrator updates.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, it's been a busy couple of days with HWL and really trying to get this contract right, working with the Benefits Committee. So there's just a ton going on. Budget season. Other updates, thank you, Jennifer, my assistant. So you requested that we reach out to the owners of the gas station. We actually just got a hold of them. So I don't want to identify the individual's name, but I can pass that on to the commissioners if they'd like to speak to him directly. But apparently, in 2009, we had negotiated to $2.4 million and somehow didn't work out. What he indicated to Jennifer would be, obviously, in 2023, a significant amount more. So I don't know if that changes things in terms of, how we feel about this property over here. But we have done some due diligence there, and but certainly we can still delay if you want to wait till Monday, and I can give him a call and get some more context. And but keep in mind, in 2009, it appears that we had negotiated with him in some capacity, and what Jennifer indicated is for some reason it didn't come to fruition, but he did indicate to Jennifer that it would be a significant amount more in 2023, obviously, because the price of real estate has increased significantly.
Okay.
But I can't give any more context than that without physically talking to the gentleman. But
Have you got more updates?
No, that's it. That's
Okay.
kind of it, sir. Thank you.
Commissioner Peck?
The Shoreline Reconveyance Committee is a group from various local jurisdictions that have been meeting for a few years to try and find a way to legally, through the assistance of Congress, to reconvey some of the shoreline properties abutting Benton and Franklin counties along the Columbia River. And that committee was one I was invited to participate on years ago, but I have relocated since then, and I now live on a piece of property that could potentially benefit from this shoreline reconveyance if it should happen. Opinions vary greatly as to whether or not it's likely to happen. It's been 20 years of effort by various people. Nonetheless, I wanted to disclose that on the chance that the board, for whatever reason, wish to have someone else serve on this committee. I would certainly be happy to step aside. I don't think that any of my actions are at all likely to be subject to any personal interest, but because we all strive to avoid even the appearance of a conflict, I wanted to make that disclosure and ask the board to think that over in the coming weeks, and if you wish to make a change, why, I certainly would support it. I had a pretty good WASAC remote meeting on Public Records Act yesterday, a lot of good information. Those are recorded. If you've got questions about Public Records Act or you want more clarity, it's one that I would highly recommend you maybe listen to over a lunch hour or something. It's easy listening, but a lot of good information. And I got a WASAC bylaws committee meeting that is coming up today, and like the rest of us, a number of meetings this week. Thanks.
Commissioner Mullen?
So coming up this week, Thursday, is the Greater Columbia Behavioral Health Meeting and Long-Term Aging and Care, if there's any interest in those. I will not be attending. I'm going to be taking part of the Hanford tour. And just want to note too, following up on Mr. Didier's comments on the traffic backup from farm implements. It's just common courtesy, I think, to tell your employees, workers, that when you have 10 vehicles plus following you, the courteous thing to do would be to pull over and let them by, because people are going to be tempted to pass. And for everyone's safety, they need to be aware of that. I understand the equipment is a lot bigger than what it used to be, and the roads aren't wide enough, but there's going to be an accident again if they don't show some common courtesy and pull off to the side of the road so people can get by. It's just, when you have that many cars backed up, someone is going to inevitably pull out and pass and create a very dangerous situation for everyone involved. And then I just want to bring up the fact again, too, on the Ben Franklin Transit, the BB gun shooting of a window has somehow escalated to people calling it an active shooter, which I find very I don't even have the words to say it. There's no comparison. Our local police departments do an excellent job of responding to all of the incidents that happen at Ben Franklin Transit. And I just want to say a big thank you to them. Their response times are great, and that there are much greater needs in the community, such as mental health and the homelessness, that needs to be addressed before any consideration is given to hiring our own police department on, or policing of the Ben Franklin Transit buses. I'm for everyone's safety, but I think this is just an overreach in trying to expand the transit, and I'm in total disagreement with it. I think our local law enforcements do a fantastic job of response and response times with the transit. So I think there's a much greater need in our community than extra security on buses. Thank you.
My last week was the agenda meeting on Friday, and I talked to the chairman of Benton County, and I told him what we had going on there. We had started this agenda meeting, and he was very receptive to it, and they're going to probably adapt to it also, so they can go over the agenda and make sure that they have the discussion items that they want to discuss. And then I had the Eastern Washington Council of Governments meeting, where they had the EPA and the Department of Ecology, and they had a very good, robust discussion about the moving goalposts and the fact that on the cleanup up north, and the things that are going on with the EPA and the Department of Ecology, and that the contaminants are moving upstream, and they're having to clean upstream from where the contamination happened from. It was a very good meeting, and I was very proud to be part of that group of representatives, county governments. And then on my movements, again, another wreck on Taylor Flats. We had a gentleman running a truck that ran a stop sign on Birch and hit a van full of farm workers. Luckily, and I went right by as it happened, I had my wife get out and help because she's an EMT. Luckily, the vehicle hit the nose of the van and took the motor and everything off of the van. Nobody died. 1 second later, it hits the center of that van. We would have had multiple casualties. I'm just asking people to slow down, because I have a young man driving a truck for me, and he said he was going the speed limit. He had 2 vehicles pass him on a blind hill, not knowing if traffic's coming the other way on Glade Road. I'm just seeing erratic behavior out there, and I'm asking our sheriff's department, please, let's start writing these people up. I witnessed a fully loaded semi pass another one on a blind hill. This is completely out of control. We have family driving these roads. We all have family driving these roads. We need safety. As far as the turnout, I'm willing to take my property on Glade Road and put an area of 20 feet wide gravel, so farm implements can get off the road for a whole mile to let traffic go by. And we need more people willing to do this. We've got to make these roadways safe. Glade and Sagemore, or Glade and Taylor Flats. Taylor Flats is probably the most dangerous road right now that I've seen in a long time. I'm witnessing wrecks all the time on that road. And I'm just asking people to slow down. Take time to think about what you're doing before you do it. It may cost you your life, but it may cost one of our loved ones' life. So please just consider safety first in your driving. And the last thing I asked Mr. Gonzalez was you to give us an update on the Attorney General. Have we heard anything back on the Attorney General?
No, we haven't. I was actually planning on calling today or tomorrow. I haven't had an opportunity to reach out yet, so I will do that.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my updates. And next we have the elected department head business. Is there any elected or department heads who would like to speak?
I watched last week's commissioner meeting, and the subject of bridges came up and the postings on them, and I realized that there's quite a bit of confusion about the signage on those. And I'd just like to point people to the Public Works website. We have a sheet. If the screen is down, I'd bring it up for you. But we have an explanation of how to interpret those signs and what they mean.
A gentleman sent me that text, and I read it because they're confused, and they all think they're out of compliance.
And it is. And, you know, I'll point out, too, we have, overall, we have 101 structures. 83 of them are 20 feet or over and are on the Federal Register. The balance of those are what we call small structures. We inspect them all. We rate them all. Of that 101 structures, 77 of them were built prior to 1973. So we've got, and most of the structures built, you know, designed in those days, you know, their design lifespan, which is not to say that's how long they're going to last. Right. Generally 50 to 75 years. Modern bridges, 100 years, but these ones are back in the day. And you know, they're just, we take good care of them, but like all of us, age wins in the end. And we've been very proactive in getting in bridge funding and replacing bridges, and we still are. And we just, Glenwood, we just found out we got funding to replace that. So hopefully in the next couple of years, that'll be another one. And we still have several others that we're going to put forward for funding in the future. We put 5 up this time, but we only got 1. So that's how it kind of works. We compete statewide for bridge money, and there are over 7,700 bridges in the state, and 30% of them, over 30% of them, are either deficient or obsolete in some regard or another. So it's a competitive pot of money, and we've done well in that, and I hopefully we get to continue to do so. But I just wanted to let people know we do pay attention, and if they have questions about reading the weight limit signs, especially the new ones, which only talk to single unit trucks. And right. We actually have a picture that shows examples of what these particular kind of single unit trucks look like. So if they're having difficulty, these are PDFs, they can download them, print them out, put them in the truck. And if they have any questions, they can feel free to reach out and call me.
So a couple questions, Craig. These bridges were built back when there were single axle trucks and at most a 10-wheeler. Now we've got trucks that are enormously linked with drop axles, and that's where the confusion's coming in. Is there any possible way, instead of bridges on some of these smaller waterways, that we could put in culvert?
We've done that in the past. It just depends on the conditions. Okay. Sometimes that's the appropriate way to go, and other times it's not.
And then my last question is, what would be the process to start this turnout area for a vehicle if I wanted to do it on my property for safety? Is because I'd be encroaching on the right-of-way that is granted. Is there a problem with that? If we put down base and gravel for farm equipment to get off the side of the road, is there any problem with doing that?
No, not off the top. You know, I neutrally, no, I don't think so. I think it might be more appropriate to sit down and have that discussion with the board. Okay. Is we want to fund a program that does that.
Oh, I'm not talking about funding. I'm talking about doing it on my own dime.
Well, and that, in essence, too, that, you know, when we take donations in county road, I mean, that's it's a transaction, and there are things, rules and regulations we have to follow, standards we must have to follow.
Maybe this is a discussion for another day. Maybe
give
you some time to research it.
And I ask each, if you wish, seek me out individually, and we can sit down and discuss the merits or what of doing it, and how the board eventually wants to proceed by doing this.
And I think they need to be on Highway 17 too, because I've seen that roadway.
Well,
That is horrible.
Oh, I agree, but
There needs
that's
to be
not
some-
my, unfortunately, that's
No,
not our road.
that's out of our
and
purview.
Not yet, anyway. We might end up, well, never mind.
I thank you very much. Is there any other questions for Mr. Erdman? Thank you very much for
Thank you.
coming up. Is there any other elected or department heads that would like to speak? All right, we'll move down to administration office business. Anything?
No, sir.
All righty. Back down to public comment. Is there anybody for public comment? And you can speak twice if you would like, but is there anybody on the phones?
Thank you for letting me speak a second time.
It's your right.
I have a very hard time with the consent agenda. Thankfully, your guys's was like three items. But that's how this rotely approving whoever the Mid-Columbia Library Board sends to you guys has slipped by. When I talked to the commissioners over in Benton County, we've never done this before. So they didn't know that they were approving it because it was coming through the consent agenda. And I apologize for the Benton County Republican Party. I'm sitting there saying, well, Mid-Columbia Library is circumventing our commissioners. Next day, I start researching the meeting minutes. Oh, they're sending them to you guys. And I decide, oh, I got to check your guys' out. And it comes to you, and then it goes to Benton County. But it's all been under at least I know for sure that Benton County's has been under the consent agenda. So that's one of the reasons I've always disliked the consent agenda. Because, you look at it, oh, okay, vote it through. But we really need to be watching these guys. Not me.
What do we got going on? What do you cause here?
It's a national emergency contact that's sent out throughout the United States.
It's just a test?
It's just a test.
I'm a troublemaker
All righty, is there anybody else for public comment? Nobody on the phone? All right. With that, we don't have any executive sessions?
No, sir. We're good to go.
All righty. If there's no other business for the good of the county, this meeting is adjourned.
Forgot to, I was going to mention it and I forgot. But yeah, it's a national test.